Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and murderous good guy dolls. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're starting one of my favorite franchises of all time, Child's Play. Chucky is the most notorious horror toy ever, and his antics over the past 33 years have seen him range from legitimate horror to almost straight up comedy, and recently he has come full circle with a pretty large cast of characters ready to exist on the small screen with him. But today we're looking at the film that started it all, Tom Holland's 1988 film, the original Child's Play. Screenwriter Don Mancini came up with the idea of a feature-length killer doll film during his time at UCLA as a film student. He was inspired by Talkie Tina from The Twilight Zone and the Zuni doll from the Trilogy of Terror, and also by the booming success of the Cabbage Patch Kids at the time. He wanted to create a dark satire about children's marketing. Mancini's original script involved the dolls and Andy's blood mixing, and the doll representing his rage and killing Andy's enemies for him, similar to the 2019 reboot. There are definitely hints of those themes in the final version, but they're not so blatant. David Kirshner came on to produce, which is interesting because this is the guy who created the incredible movie An American Tail, as well as a really cute animated film called Rose Petal Place, which spawned a whole toy line. Something about that just doesn't sit right with me. He had recently read The Dollhouse Murders and really wanted to make a killer toy movie, and once he found Mancini's script, he immediately picked it up. Kirshner brought on Tom Holland to direct, who had recently written and directed Fright Night. He, writer John Lafia, and Mancini expanded the story further, coming up with the idea for Karen to be a single mom, the voodoo aspect as well as the serial killer aspect of the movie. Brad Dourif from Blue Velvet, The Exorcist 3, Lord of the Rings, and a ton of other films was chosen to play Charles Lee Ray and voice the evil doll. Catherine Hicks from Seventh Heaven was cast as Karen, and Chris Sarandon as Detective Mike Norris. And of course, one of the cutest movie kids of all time, Alex Vincent, was chosen to play Andy. 6-year-old Alex was never afraid on set, he says. The hardest part for him was actually referring to Aunt Maggie as a bitch during his audition. Kevin Yeager, who people that watched my Hellraiser reviews will recognize as the director of Bloodline, was the one who designed and executed the various forms of Chucky that we see in the film. It's really amazing to see all the behind-the-scenes images and videos of the different puppets and animatronics that were used. And this is where he met Catherine Hicks, and they quickly fell in love, getting married in 1990, and they are still together today. We love to see it. Child's Play had a budget of around $9 million, and it opened #1 at the box office, eventually grossing $44 million worldwide. It was met with more positive reviews than negative, although some people couldn't get past the voodoo aspect of the film or just the killer doll premise. Tom Holland's direction is typically praised for being able to bring together the wide array of tones and themes in the film without it feeling too messy. And of course, there was a lot of outcry from fearful parents that thought the movie would incite violence in children. But fuck those guys. Child's Play is still pretty well regarded today, with a 71 and 63 on Rotten Tomatoes, but as I go through the scores later in the series, we will once again confirm that Rotten Tomatoes isn't the most accurate system for a long-standing horror franchise. Without further ado, I think it's time we hidey-ho over to the Barkley residence to see just how much damage this pint-sized killer can do. Better snuggle into your favorite overalls, folks. It's time for Child's Play. The movie starts with a bang, literally, as the Lakeshore Strangler, aka Charles Lee Ray, is chased by Detective Mike Norris. A gunfight leads to Ray getting shot in the leg, and his getaway driver, Eddie Caputo, ditches him. Ray breaks into a toy store with Norris right behind him. It's here we get our first glimpse of the good guy dolls. More bullets fly, and Ray takes another to the shoulder. He's able to sneak off again, but he realizes he isn't going to make it out of this, and gives a chilling promise that he will kill both Norris and Caputo.
No matter what!
Ray starts rambling that he needs to find somebody, but the dying killer collapses onto a wall of good guys, and Charles has an idea. Norris listens as Ray repeats the chant we should all know by heart now. Ray is placing his soul inside of the good guy, and as the chant continues, storm clouds form and lightning strikes. As Ray finishes, a lightning bolt strikes the toy store and blows it to shit. Norris is still alive and stumbles across Ray's body, unaware of what just really happened. Now it's time to meet the star of the show, the cartoon-watching, toast-burning gangster, Andy Barkley. We also see that the good guys have successfully conquered the marketplace, as they have a TV show, a cereal, even a children's clothing line, but they have just unveiled their newest product, the brand new Good Guy doll. In this bizarre commercial, we see it blinks, turns its head, and can say 3 whole phrases. Andy is definitely impressed and hopes that it's what his big birthday present is. Andy has made his mother a cavity-inducing breakfast that he spills most of, and jumps on his mom the same way I did when I was that age on my birthday. These two have such a genuine connection on screen, and it really helps sell their loving relationship. It's present time and Andy goes straight to the big one, but all he got was clothes and a Good Guy tool set. Karen plans on getting him a Good Guy, but just needs to save up the money. We cut to Karen at work when her coworker Maggie tells her there is a peddler outside with a Good Guy. After some haggling, Karen buys it for $30. Her snooty boss Walter tells Karen she has to work tonight, and Maggie says she is happy to watch Andy. She is able to go home long enough to give Andy his Good Guy, and Andy is ecstatic. That night, Andy is teaching Chucky about carpentry, but Chucky is more interested to hear that Eddie Caputo has escaped the police. Aunt Maggie says it's time for bed, but Chucky tells Andy he wants to watch the news. Aunt Maggie obviously sends them to bed, only for her to find Chucky watching the news a moment later. Andy denies putting Chucky in front of the TV, but Maggie obviously doesn't believe him. But it's all good as she tucks him in and gives him a kiss goodnight. A little later we get a little POV coming from Andy's room and watching Maggie. Maggie hears the POV dragging a chair and sees Andy's door open. Maggie finds the chair against the front door and relocks it. She hears a noise in the kitchen and finds the flour knocked over and gets startled by a call from Karen. She tells Karen everything is fine, which I'd say contradicts everything that just happened. We see the POV pick up a hammer while Maggie cleans the flour, and when she turns around she gets smacked in the face with it and stumbles right through the 6th floor window onto a car. Karen gets off the bus to find lots of cops and lots of onlookers. She finds a ton of cops in her apartment and Andy with Detective Norris. Norris explains that Maggie fell from the window and died, and he shows her some tiny footprints on the kitchen counter. Karen is furious when Norris suggests it was Andy on the counter, and when he looks at his pajama shoes matching prints, she promptly kicks the investigation out, which seems a tad unrealistic for a homicide investigation. Andy is back in bed when he realizes Chucky has the same matching shoes as he does, and they happen to have flour on them. He runs out to tell his mom and the detective, but obviously they don't believe him and he is sent back to bed. Norris tells his partner Santos to dig up what he can about the Barkleys and to send this tiny hammer to get tested as it may just be a murder weapon. Karen finds Andy talking to Chucky, and Andy tells her Chucky says his real name is Charles Lee Ray and Daddy sent him from heaven to watch over them. Oh, and also this.
He said that Maggie was a real bitch and got what she deserved.
Karen does not like that and tells Andy to stop making things up, as Chucky is made of plastic. Andy apologizes for making up stories and finally goes to bed with this giant doll. He starts talking to the doll, who looks over to see Karen is listening and repeats one of his catchphrases, "Chucky tired." The next day, Karen walks Andy and Chucky to school, but we see the boys are playing a little hooky today. Andy takes the subway to a less child-friendly part of Detroit, and they find Eddie Caputo's hideout. Andy has to tinkle, and we get another POV shot of Chucky running into the abandoned house. Eddie hears as Chucky blows out the oven's pilot light and turns on the gas. Caputo comes downstairs gun drawn and lets a couple of shots off. Andy hears the gunshots and runs toward the house because sure. Caputo nearly shoots Andy by mistake, but hears a noise in the kitchen. Luckily, Andy wanders off as Caputo bursts in and fires a shot, blowing the house to smithereens in a big ball of fire, killing Caputo. Karen arrives at the police station where Norris explains they found Andy at the scene of an explosion. Karen tells Andy he has to tell everyone the truth about what's been going on or they'll take him away. Andy tries to get Chucky to confess, but the dolls stay silent and Andy starts roughing him up a bit and tells his mom about Chucky's threats.
He told me never to tell about him or he'd kill me.
From behind a two-way mirror, Dr. Ardmore introduces himself and suggests Andy stay at the hospital for a few days to be evaluated. Karen has no real choice and returns home with Chucky. In a moment of desperation, she sits the doll down and begs it to say something. Chucky lets her know he likes to be hugged, and she realizes how crazy this is. She takes a look at the Good Guy box when a battery pack falls out that Chucky should need to operate. Properly freaked out, she picks up the doll to find its batteries missing and...
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
She grabs the doll from under the couch and again begs it to talk. Finally, when she lights the fireplace and threatens to throw him in, he reveals himself.
You stupid bitch, you filthy slut! Did you fuck with me?
He bites her arm before she throws him off and he runs out of the apartment. She follows him down but can't keep up with the elevator and Chucky escapes into the night. Karen rushes to the station where she finds a conveniently placed Detective Norris and she tells him Andy was telling the truth about Chucky. She tells him about the batteries and how he attacked her, and Norris is fully convinced she's a wacko. Even when she shows him the bite, he doesn't believe her, so she heads off to find the peddler she bought it from, despite Norris's warnings not to. Karen wanders the streets bothering all of the freezing homeless people when she finally finds the guy. She asks him where he got the doll, and when she doesn't have enough money for his liking, he decides to sexually assault her. Luckily, Norris followed her there and stops the man, and scares off the others with his gun. The cop threatens to beat him senseless, and the peddler says he found the doll at a burnt down toy store, one that Norris is pretty familiar with. She asks him what's wrong, and he spills the beans about Charles Lee Ray, the toy store, and his promise to kill him, but he still thinks it's all one weird coincidence. Norris takes Karen home, but now she is on the hunt and gets Ray's address from him, and tells him he isn't safe and Chucky will be after him. He has had enough crazy talk for the night and heads out, but clearly is shaken enough by the coincidences and pulls Ray's file from the station. He's driving home when Chucky pops up in the back seat and starts strangling Norris with some cables. For some reason, he hits the gas instead of the brakes, but he's able to get the cigarette lighter and burn Chucky's face. Still driving full speed, he nearly gets stabbed through the seat. Ooh, almost got the little detectives. Norris finally hits the brakes only for Chucky to hit the gas again. In Fast and Furious style, the car flips and finally comes to a halt. Norris is again attacked by Chucky, who narrowly misses a stab. He shoots at the doll, but Chucky tells him he can't be hurt. Chucky gets his knife back and makes his move on Norris, who shoots him in the chest, sending Chucky running. The next day, Karen has made her way to Charles Lee Ray's home, which is something. She sees writing about the mighty Damballa, and a figure Ray is kneeling to. Someone sneaks up behind Karen, but it's just good old Detective Norris. He tells Karen he learned Ray's nickname was Chucky, and he spent a lot of time with a man named John Bishop, the one painted on the wall. Unfortunately, Chucky beat them to him as he is making tea. John is the one who taught him the chant and how to beat death, but Chucky is surprised to see that the bullet hurt him and he can bleed. John tells him he is turning human, and soon he'll be stuck as a doll forever. Chucky wants his help getting out of the body, but John isn't down with that. He calls Chucky an abomination and says he used everything he taught him for evil. He goes to call the police, I think, when Chucky says he planned for something like this and unveils a voodoo doll of John. I have no idea why John would make a voodoo doll of himself, but let's ignore that. Chucky breaks John's leg, then an arm, and John is finally ready to talk. John tells him he can only switch bodies with the first human he revealed himself to, and Chucky is delighted that he gets to be 6 again. Chucky says farewell and stabs the voodoo doll, leaving John to bleed out. Karen and Norris find him still alive, and John tells them to save the boy before he can say the chant. He tells Karen the only way to kill Chucky is to kill his heart, and then he dies. At the hospital, Andy sees Chucky sneaking into the building and calls for Dr. Ardmore. The doctor thinks Andy is full of shit, and we watch this poor small child cry, and it's so sad. Chucky finds an office where Andy's room number is written down and is able to snag some keys. We get a great shot of the animatronic at work as Chucky opens the door and walks over to the bed. He climbs onto Andy only for it to be a trick and Andy escapes. Ardmore sees Andy escaping and follows. Andy hides in an operating room, but Chucky is already in there and jumps him. But little badass Andy grabs a scalpel to fight back, even though he keeps tripping over himself. But this isn't a good look when the doctor finds him, and Ardmore tries to sedate him as he yells about Chucky. Chucky doesn't have time for all this and stabs the doctor in the leg. He falls over and Chucky puts a helmet on his head that's connected to an electric shock machine. You know, because the world is horrible and those things actually exist. Chucky turns it on and fries the doctor to death as Andy begs him to stop. A bit later, Karen and Norris arrive, and Santos, believing Andy to be the killer, says he fried the doctor and escaped. Norris asks if he's seen the doll, and Karen figures Andy would go home. As Andy locks and barricades himself inside, Chucky makes friends in the elevator. Andy hides in a closet and arms himself with a tiny bat as Chucky comes in through the chimney and stalks the house with his iconic knife. Andy comes out to face him, but Chucky gets the jump on him and chases him through the house. Eventually, Chucky knocks him out with the bat as Karen and Norris arrive. Chucky starts the ritual and the storm clouds start rolling in. Norris breaks the door down and Karen gets Chucky away from Andy. Chucky pulls his knife and slashes Norris in the leg. Norris pulls an extra gun out of his sock because of course, and gives it to Karen as he goes after Chucky. But Chucky is able to knock the wind out of him and then knock him out. He goes for a killing blow and Karen shoots him in the leg and sends him flying. But the gun jams and this ferocious Chucky charges. She trips in the living room but manages to throw Chucky into the fireplace and trap him behind the screen. She can't reach the matches and the now conscious Andy helps her. He lights the match and Chucky tries to butter him up. Take it away, Andy.
Friends to the end, remember?
This is the end, friend.
He lights Chucky up, who spins around and climbs on furniture in this real fire stunt done by an actor. Eventually, the crispy doll stops moving and appears to be dead. They go to check on Norris and tell him Chucky is dead. But when Andy grabs the first aid kit, he sees the good guy is still up and running. He runs back to his mom but gets tripped by Chucky, who is rocking a real scary look. I love it so much. Andy runs from this smoky monster and Karen locks him out, and Chucky says if they give him the boy, he'll let them live. What a nice offer. Chucky tries to get in through the other door and slices Karen's hand and almost gets her a few more times. He gets in through the other door and chases Karen and Andy some more. Karen now has Norris's gun and shoots him once with no effect, but the second shot takes off his head. But the doll keeps coming and a third shot takes off an arm and a fourth blows off a foot, finally taking the doll down. The body keeps crawling and she puts 2 more shots into its back, which appears to kill it again. Santos walks into a hell of a scene, and after calling for backup, Norris tells him the kid was right and the doll was the killer. Santos doesn't believe him and goes to look for himself. After a very thorough poking, he decides the doll isn't dangerous, and brings it in to talk some sense into Norris. Luckily for Norris's reputation, Chucky isn't done and bursts through a vent, choking Santos. They get the body off as Chucky commands it to kill them all. Karen tells Norris to shoot it in the heart, and that finally puts Chucky down for good. That right there is my childhood nightmares. Santos believes them now, but fears nobody will believe any of them. The backup has arrived, and the film ends with a shot of Andy's face, highlighting the damage this has obviously had on him. And that's Child's Play. It's a wonderful film. It's got the campiness of a low-budget B-movie, but it actually has the budget to back it up. It gets some flack for being goofy at times, which is fair. The voodoo aspect is a bit out of left field, but I wouldn't say it's much more goofy than Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th. For me, the humor works pretty well, and it's pretty held back, at least in comparison to some of the later sequels. Chucky is such a fun killer. It's pretty obvious it's him from the very beginning, but watching Karen and Norris slowly figure it out is still satisfying. The whole sequence with the batteries and his first animatronic reveal is fucking great. His physical transformation throughout the movie is so subtle but important. The receding hairline, the less plasticky look, the deep set eyes. I also love how rabid Chucky is, the way he lashes out, and he's so angry and vulgar. He's so chaotic and fun to watch. The filmmakers also made great use of both animatronics and actual actors when necessary, actually creating sets that were 30% increased in size, so the actor would look like a doll in the environment. The movie doesn't cheat you. You get to see this doll walk across the room, something I don't think viewers would have been able to expect when the film first came out. Brad Dourif's voice is perfect. He brings so much intensity to the doll, and all of the actors do a great job. Mad props to little Alex Vincent. Despite his best efforts, he is such a defenseless protagonist, so while I don't think many people would expect Chucky to win or kill the boy, you do still feel and fear for him. It's not a perfect movie. Sometimes the editing seems a bit disjointed or like a few steps have been skipped over, but it's nothing too bad. I think Charles Lee Ray could have been fleshed out a bit more, as well as the voodoo. It's kind of just thrown in there, and I don't necessarily mind the addition of it, but the introduction of John and the rules of Chucky's transformation was pretty flimsy. I think he could have been a bit more important to the overall story. I do like that the messages and themes about commercialization and child exploitation were toned down a bit. A movie that's really blatant and upfront with its message has to be really almost perfect for me to really invest myself in it. I think Child's Play has enough in there to say without trying to shove it down your throat. The film also pays a lot of homage to the slashers that came before it. The POV shots a la Black Christmas and Halloween, Andy hiding in the closet like Halloween, and the way Chucky just keeps on coming back again and again. He was just so hard to kill. It's such a fun movie. I could watch it 100 times and smile through it every time. All in all, Child's Play is a classic and it has really stood the test of time. If you haven't watched it before, you absolutely should. It's free on YouTube, so there's really nothing to lose. Well, that's about it. Up next, we'll be watching Chucky's sophomore outing with Child's Play 2. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Child's Play. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my Chucky reviews. If you want to support the channel further, be sure to check me out on Instagram and Patreon. Thanks, y'all.